Greetings and welcome back to another video on the Kantoku channel. In today's video we're going to be talking about one of Japan's deadliest love stories. The story of Sada Abe. A woman who loved a man so much that she ended up killing him through erotic asphyxiation, to then dismember his manhood and carry it with her in every part of her life. She even went far enough and tried to use it for her own sexual pleasure later on. But that said, let's rewind back to the beginning and start from the top. Oh yeah, by the way, since I can't show much footage in terms of movies for this video, I am now a VTuber. Yay! The year is 1905. An upper-middle-class Tokyo family of 7 children are about to bring a new life into the world. It's on the last day of the Battle of Tsuyama, the 28th of May, a Sunday in the spring that a baby girl is born. They name her Sada. Describing them as being a family of 7 children before Sada's birth might be a bit of a stretch, however. As it happened, only 4 of the 8 children were able to make it into adulthood, where 2 of the 4 who didn't survive were a stillborn and a miscarriage. The other 2 siblings died of illnesses. The parents, Shigeyoshi, the father, and Katsu, the mother, were honest people. They diligently ran their tatami mat business and had not much of any quarrels with the law or others. Same could not be said about the 3 remaining siblings, however. Sada's oldest brother, Shintaro, was known as a womanizer, and as he got married, he took a large amount of the family's money and ran away with it. Toku, the oldest sister, carried on with her life relatively spot-free. She was married into a merchant's family and went on to raise 8 children on her own. Toku was described as being quite successful. Teruko, the 5th child in the lineup, was not completely unlike her younger sister, Sada, in that she was quite sexually precocious, something we will get more into further into the story. At a relatively young age, she was caught having several sexual affairs. This made her father furious and led him to sell her to a brothel. After a while, people around them were able to get him to buy her back, which thereafter led to her finding a husband and marrying into a more quiet lifestyle. Sada herself had quite a docile upbringing up until the year she turned 14. Being the youngest child to survive, her mother ended up doting her quite a bit. She was encouraged to take classes in singing and playing the shamisen, both being activities associated with geishas and prostitutes at the time. During this age, geishas were seen as glamorous celebrities. Sada wanted to pursue this image and often skipped school to practice not only the music, but also makeup application. The year she turned 14, however, something happened. As her older siblings acted as they did, Sada was often out by herself and became quite independent. This led to her finding refuge in friend groups of youths in a similar position to her. During one of the outings, they were at a friend's house. While playing around on the 2nd floor, Sada stated that she acted older than she was, and they started to get a bit intimate with each other. She didn't mean much with it, however, but the boy acted upon it and forced himself inside her. Sada was in a lot of pain and bled for 2 days after that. She thought she had to tell her mother, which she ended up doing, and she went to talk to the parents of the boy, who refused to speak back. Now, Sada was scared that she would have to marry the boy, because back then, it was fairly customary that you were to marry the person you lose your virginity to as a woman. A woman who is not a virgin often had difficulties finding a husband, and Sada did not like the thought of that. Her mother encouraged her to try not to think of it too much, because after all, what had happened wasn't of her own will. And if they stopped talking about it, maybe people would forget about it. For a while after this, Sada was spoiled by her parents, and she started going out a lot. She found a new group of people to hang out with, and she started to feel better about herself. At some point after this, the family ends up moving to the countryside. My assumption is that it's somewhere after Shintaro leaves with the money, but I can't quite piece it together from what I'm reading. In the village, Sada becomes fond of a man living there. They get involved in a sexual relationship and take walks together in the village. Being a small community in the countryside, however, this leads to rumors spreading rapidly, something that the parents, especially the father, did not take lightly. According to Sada, he had said, "If you like men all that much, I'll sell you off to a brothel." Toku and their mother became worried about Sada and had him rethink, and he decided to delay the decision. But as Sada turned 18, he tried to arrange her into becoming a licensed prostitute. Problem was that she was too young for that at the time, and she was instead made into a trainee as a geisha in Yokohama. The father meant for this to be a punishment and hopefully a way for Sada to see things differently. That if she had to take on sexual relations as an occupation, one of the core tasks of low-rank geishas at the time, she'd change her mind and come home to lead a more quiet life, just as her sister had done. On Sada, however, it had the opposite effect. Except for a few short visits back home, she never ended up coming back. Neither did she end up leaving similar professions. Due to not having the experience with apprenticeships from childhood, she wasn't able to climb the ranks as a traditional geisha. You needed years of training to get to such a position, and at this time the work as a geisha had become increasingly more close to that of a licensed prostitute. After 5 years as a geisha, Sada had contracted syphilis. This led to her having to undergo regular health examinations, just as you would need to as a licensed licensed prostitute. Since it paid more to be a licensed prostitute, she ended up changing her occupation. During the early 1930s, she first started off working at a brothel in Osaka. She stirred up a lot of trouble, and after 2 years she was able to escape the licensed prostitution system, which she had come to dislike. She then moved on to become a waitress. However, dissatisfied about the low wages, she went into unlicensed prostitution instead. In 1933, her mother passed away, and while visiting her mother's grave and her father in Tokyo, she enters the prostitution market there, where she also becomes a mistress for the first time. Early 1934, her father became ill, and she took care of him for 10 days until he passed away. Later that year, Sada is arrested during a raid of the unlicensed brothel she's working at. A friend of the brothel owner named Kinosuke Kasahara takes interest in Sada and helps her get released from jail. Seeing how she seemed to be in relatively good standing economically, he made Sada his mistress. He got her a house and a stable income. Talking about Sada to the police, he said, "She was really strong, a real powerful one. Even though I am pretty jaded, she was enough to astound me. She wasn't satisfied unless we did it 2, 3, or 4 times a night. To her, it was unacceptable unless I had my hand on her private parts all night long. At first it was great, but after a couple of weeks I got a little exhausted." She had asked him if he couldn't leave his wife and marry her instead, which he wasn't inclined to do. Neither was he very positive when Sada asked him to take in another lover. At last the relationship ended and Sada left for Nagoya. In the end of the statement, Kinosuke said, "She is a slut and a whore, and as what she has done makes clear, she is a woman whom men should fear." Sada didn't have much positive to say about him either, and in a testimony said, "He didn't love me and treated me like an animal. He was the kind of scum who would then plead with me when I said that we should break up." In 1935, while in Nagoya, her intention is to leave the sex industry, so she starts working at a restaurant again. Not long after, she starts becoming romantically involved with a customer named Goro Omiya, something she realizes the establishment owner would not be specially fond of, so she ends up going back to Tokyo again. In Tokyo, she bumps into Goro again. Goro was a banker and a professor, intending to get into the Japanese parliament. He suggested that Sada should start her own restaurant to become financially independent. His idea was for her to start working as an apprentice, a piece of advice she took to heart and acted upon. On the 1st of February 1936, she started working as an apprentice at a restaurant in Tokyo. The owner, Kichizo Ishida, aged 42 at the time, had started off as an apprentice, working his way up the ranks to the status of an owner. At the time when Sada joined the company, Kichizo had been known as a womanizer, and barely did anything in terms of running the restaurant, and left most of it to his wife. Kichizo started to make advances towards Sada, and because Goro never satisfied her sexually, she was highly susceptible to his approaches. Their first sexual encounter was at a private dining room in the restaurant. Kichizo entered as a customer and had Sada serve her, while also secretly doing the deed together with her. Later on in April the same year, they plan a meeting at a machiai, which was a tea house used back in the days in a similar fashion as you would use a love hotel in modern days. They planned to just have a short fling, but it ended up becoming a 4-day-long sex holiday. For 2 weeks they went on like this, moving from tea house to tea house. They barely ate anything and practically lived off sake and sex during this time. Sada commented on the reason she liked Kichizo so much, saying, "It is hard to say exactly what was so good about Ishida, but it was impossible to see anything bad about his looks, his attitude, his skill as a lover, the way he expressed his feelings. I had never met such a sexy man." After these 2 weeks, Sada became agitated. She started drinking a lot and became anxious over not being able to be near Kichizo. She couldn't bear the feeling of knowing that at any point in time he could have been having intercourse with his wife, or just any woman in general. According to her, she wasn't jealous, however, just so incredibly deeply in love with him. For the first time in her life, she had encountered true love. Their next meeting started off in an intimidating manner. Sada had pawned some of her clothes to buy a kitchen knife, and when Kichizo came to the machiai, she acted out a scene in a play she had seen recently, where a geisha attacks her lover with a knife and ultimately stabs herself. She quotes a line from the play reading, "Kichi, you wore that kimono just to please one of your favorite customers. You bastard. I'll kill you for that." At first he seemed to be startled, but seemed to be quite delighted with it, since he assumed it to be a joke. Sada would make jokes in a similar fashion throughout the rest of the time together during this encounter. At one point, she placed the knife near his genitals and made him promise to not be with another woman, or else she'd make sure it came off. Shortly after this, Sada had to leave because she had scheduled an appointment with Goro, who later came to give her 50 yen as thanks for her services. She wanted to get it over with as quickly as possible, and when she came back to Kichizo, he teased her about what she had to do for the 50 yen she was given by Goro. Further into the encounter, they started trying out choke play and bondage. They both enjoyed it, and Sada was especially fond of being on the giving end. At first they started off slowly and further increased the intensity of the choking, until at one point, while using the sash from one of Sada's clothes to choke him, Kichizo started getting a persistent pain in the neck from it all. He ended up having to take pain medication to relieve himself of the pain it had caused. According to Sada's words, as he had started to doze off, he said to her, "You'll put the cord around my neck and squeeze it again while I'm sleeping, won't you? If you start to strangle me, don't stop, because it is so painful afterwards." She said that she had thought this was a plea for her to kill him, but later reflected on it and decided he probably said it out of jest. About 2 in the morning on the 18th of May, 1936, while Kichizo is asleep, Sada wraps the sash around his neck and pulls. She laid next to his corpse for hours and taking part in necrophilia. She ends the entire ordeal by dismembering his member. She carefully wraps it up and then with the blood she writes Sada Ishida no Kichi Futari Kiri, meaning we, Sada and Kichizo, Ishida, are alone, on his inner thigh and a bedsheet. She then carved in the kanji for her name into his left arm. Knowing that her being involved with Goro would lead to him never being able to pursue anything in life whenever she is to be arrested, she goes to meet him and apologizes. On the 19th of May 1936, newspapers started writing about the story, and Goro's political career was now ruined. Sada's life was under public scrutiny forever from that point. An intense search for Sada begins, but because she had quite a bit of momentum, it would take a couple of days for them to find her again. On the 19th of May, she went out shopping and saw a movie. The day after, she stayed at an inn under a pseudonym, and spent the day writing farewell letters to Goro and Kichizo. She also started planning out a suicide and practiced necrophilia once again. She explained it as follows, and I can't believe I'm about to read this out loud, but here I am. I felt attached to Ishida's penis, and thought that only after taking leave from it quietly could I then die. I unwrapped the paper holding them and gazed at his penis and scrotum. I put his penis in my mouth and even tried to insert it inside me. It didn't work, however, though. I kept trying and trying. Then I decided that I would flee to Osaka, staying with Ishida's penis all the while. In the end, I would jump from a cliff on Mount Ikoma while holding onto his penis. Yikes, fucking hell, dude. At 4 in the afternoon that day, police show up to her room and arrest her. "Don't be so formal," she told them. "You're looking for Sada Abe, right? Well, that's me. I am Sada Abe." When the police were not convinced, she displayed Ishida's genitalia as proof. Sada was interrogated throughout 8 sessions and was asked several specific questions, such as why she chose to take his genitalia, where she responded saying, "Because I couldn't take his head or body with me. I wanted to take the part of him that brought back to me the most vivid memories." When asked why she committed the murder, her eyes lit up and she responded saying, "I loved him so much. I wanted him all to myself, but since we were not husband and wife, as long as he lived, he could be embraced by other women. I knew that if I killed him, no other woman could ever touch him again, so I killed him." After the interrogations, the trials didn't start until November that year. The judge for some reason admitted that he found certain details of the case to be sexually arousing, but that he was going to carry out the trial with utmost seriousness. In December 1936, Sada was convicted of murder and mutilation of a corpse. The prosecution demanded 10 years in prison, and Sada was inclined to get the death penalty. But in the end, she was only sentenced to 6 years in prison. She ended up being released exactly 5 years after the murders on the 17th of May 1941. When she got out of prison, she started using an alias and got into a relationship with a man she in her memoirs labeled as the letter Y. When the family of Y realized her true identity, she broke off the relationship. After World War II, the Japanese government wanted to distract people from the devastating consequences of what had happened and encouraged a so-called 3S policy, consisting of sports, screen, and sex. What screen is, I do not know. This led to stories about people such as Sada Abe to become popular, and Sada became a bit of a cult personality in Japan. People wrote stories based off of her story. She participated in interviews and ultimately also wrote an autobiography. She also regularly appeared in a stage production, and at one point a writer named Ango Sakaguchi interviewed her as an authority on sexuality and freedom. In 1970, she stopped being a public figure and wasn't found again until somewhere in the mid-1970s by a director named Nagisa Oshima. He found her in a nunnery in Kansai, where he asked her for permission about creating the film In the Realm of Senses, which she had no objections toward. It is unknown as to when she passed away, since nobody really knows what she was up to after the nunnery, or if that's where she lived her final days. For this video, the sources I've used to write the script are the films In the Realm of Senses, A Woman Called Sada Abe, and Love and Crime. I wanted to show footage from these films to tell the story. However, due to the nature of what is in them, it was difficult to make that happen. A Woman Called Sada Abe covers the relationship, sexual encounters, and murder of Kichizo very closely, but it doesn't really branch much further out than their relationship, and I would argue that if you had not a clue about the story of Sada Abe before watching it, it would be a bit difficult to follow. At the end of the film, they briefly cover some parts of her childhood, but it's not that much. Worth noting is that it is a pinku, which means that despite not being as bad as in the realm of senses in terms of sexual content, it contains a lot of it. And based on the story, I would think that you should be ready for that anyways. In the realm of senses is described as a pornographic art film on Wikipedia, and that is 100% what it is. I was quite intimidated about going into it, but as I started getting used to it, I really enjoyed this film. Cinematically, it's a great step up from A Woman Called Sada Abe, and even the storytelling is better. For a literal porn film, it's extremely well made. It also has a Criterion release, so it's available in immaculate image quality and with good English subtitles. This film, however, does not seem to be following the written sources as closely as A Woman Called Sada Abe. If I were to recommend one over the other, I'd definitely go for this one though. Just remember, this isn't a pinku where the sex is fake, it's a pornographic film, and I just want that to be clear. Love and Crime is more of a documentary with reconstructions. The story of Sada Abe is only a tiny part of the film, and is even more isolated than the other two films. But what made me intrigued about this film was the fact that there was a recorded interview with Sada Abe herself in it. Although it was incredibly brief, it was really interesting to hear her speak in her own words about why she did it and how she feels about it, saying that it was because she loved him so much and that any woman would have done the same. With the confidence in her voice that she has, it just seems so bizarre. As for written sources, I sourced most of the sources from Wikipedia and used the general outline of the Wikipedia article of Sada Abe to structure the script. When there was something I needed specified, I referred back to the original sources cited on Wikipedia. The source I ended up reading the most of was William Johnston's Geisha, Harlot, Strangler, Star, A Woman, Sex and Morality in Modern Japan, which goes in depth and uses the documentation from the trials to talk about Sada Abe and her life in great detail. I also read a short part in Donald Ritchie's Japanese Portraits. That is all I had to say for this video. Thanks so much for watching if you made it this far. Please like, comment and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in the future. Mata ne!